Hi, Noah Digital community. We have today a very special guest for you. It happens to be an old friend of mine who was at my first wedding, Lars Kroijer, who is or was a hedge fund manager and then became a writer, and now is putting his good energy to bring transparency to a sector, the carbon credit market, which is also something I lately learned, but it's fascinating. Before we start talking about carbon and get carbonized, Lars, give us a little background on you. Who are you?
Oh God, well, who am I? Well, I'm Danish, so that's a start. Although I haven't lived there for over 30 years now, and I've reached the age where that kind of dates me. But as you said, other than being a very old friend of yours, I used to run a hedge fund, and I still sit on boards of various hedge funds. So just before I turned my back on that industry too much, then about 6-7 years ago, I started something called AlliedCrowds, which really was an attempt at getting involved with poverty eradication. Although I kind of hate that term because it's so grandiose. And over the last year, really, we've made sort of a very natural progression from that into the carbon space, because there's a lot of overlap between development and obviously various green efforts around the world. As you mentioned, I've also written a couple of books about finance, one about the whole starting and running a hedge fund, how that came about and the experience with that. And then the second, which is really more a book about portfolio management. And yeah, so there's that too.
And so carbon credit, why are you in this industry? I mean, the only thing I know about it is that the price used to be like $30 like 10 years ago, and now it comes down a lot. And everyone is questioning the systems, but everyone wants carbon. And in fact, I think World Economic Forum had this task force recently set up how to scale it. But what did fascinate you?
So I think we started like a lot of people started, which is you hear about various green efforts and climate change every day, and everyone talks about it. And once you sort of scratch the surface just a little bit, very quickly you get some questions you don't feel that there are good answers to. Like you just said, you hear about various regulated markets, you hear about airlines trying to cut emissions and so forth. You hear about politicians saying, oh, we got to go green, and every politician has their own effort. And then you sort of say, well, you could actually buy a ton of carbon. What does that even mean? You can buy a ton of carbon from many, many different sources at many, many different prices. And it just struck me as odd that how could something that is a ton of carbon, first of all, I had to Google what is a ton of carbon. I mean, and then you very quickly get to the point where it's like you could buy it for a couple of dollars or $50, and that just makes no sense. So because a lot of these voluntary carbon projects are in the developing world, and because of our prior work in development, we had done a lot of the technology around sort of database management and really data structures and how to clean up data and present it. It really wasn't that hard for us to start asking better and better questions. We are trying to bring price transparency to an incredibly opaque market. We're trying to answer the question, where are all the projects? What do they do? How are they registered? Which sectors are they in? Who are the people behind them? Why are some projects better than other projects? Why do some projects demand a massive, massive price premium? Is that right? All these questions came out of our initial efforts in this space.
Let's talk about those types of projects. What are like the big carbon credit generating projects you can do, and how big are those markets now?
Well, so I think one of the things is, if we can just start with what is a voluntary carbon project, right? So I guess it's in the name, but there are regulated markets, and then there are these voluntary markets. And the idea behind the voluntary markets is, let's say you and I run a cafe, and we decide for whatever reason we want to be carbon neutral. And there are various things around our business that we can't, we really can't stop emitting, at least not yet. But in order to be carbon neutral, we can then figure out what is our carbon footprint. And then we can go to various voluntary carbon credits around the world, and we can offset our usage of carbon and thus be carbon neutral. So as a simple case, let's say we emit 100 tons of carbon every year, we go and find a project that we think is credible and good and happy to support, and we buy 100 tons of carbon from them, and we are now, as a cafe, carbon neutral. So the voluntary carbon market does that. Now, one thing is if it's you and me in a cafe, but another thing is if this is like a massive energy provider, or a massive construction company, or Microsoft, the businesses like that, the numbers get much, much bigger, obviously. But you could also do this on a personal basis. There are lots of calculators online where you can go figure out what's my carbon footprint, and then you can be the coolest of your friends. You obviously are already, but you can be the coolest of your friends by saying I'm carbon neutral. Like, I figured out what's my carbon footprint, and then I went and offset it by buying voluntary carbon credits. So you can do that already, but obviously on a corporate level, you can do it too.
In the projects to offset, you have all types of options, right? And I guess the way to look at it, you have projects and offsetters, and in reality, hopefully the ones who have a link to a project, to a country, or to an animal, or to a type of energy, renewable energy project. What are like the top projects you see, and what countries are those?
Well, so I think there's been so first of all, there's a big change going on in this space, right? Traditionally, everyone talked about forestry projects, and they're still a huge part of the market. There have been questions about which ones have the greatest what's called additionality. Like, in other words, are these actually sucking carbon out of the air as they're meant to do? There's been a big move to have this happen in the developing world. Forestry projects in Latin America are very big. There are obviously projects all over Africa and Southeast Asia. But I think the point is that until we had all this aggregated data, there was really no answer to where is it. And also the fact that there are many, many projects in different parts of the world may not be relevant to you as a buyer, because you, for whatever reason, want very specific types of projects, be it renewables, be it methane capture projects, and in a certain part of the world, right? So I mean, we have all this data available. It's on alliedoffset.com. So go check it out. It's right there, and you can download all the cool graphs with which are the leading sectors, which are the leading countries and regions. It's changing all the time. There's also, I think, a movement I think will be very interesting, that it used to be very much a developing world thing. I predict that over the next decade, there are going to be many more projects in the developed world, because people will want to have options to offset their carbon footprint in places where they live, in places where businesses do business.
In fact, sorry to interrupt. In fact, out of the 17 billion environment, also 22 billion spent for environmental NGOs in the US, most of it is for the home market. So if you look at the philanthropic work, so getting your backyard clean and your local forest before you take care of jungles in Indonesia or in Congo.
Yeah, exactly right. And also keep in mind the voluntary carbon market at this point, I think you and I share the view that it's going to grow at staggering rates over the next decades. But at this point, it might be, it's in the hundreds of millions of dollars. And obviously you need certainty that things are what you think they are, So when you have a project that claims to capture a certain amount of carbon, how do you know that that is true? Well, you need the right kind of verifiers, you need the right registries, and it's an evolving industry. So it's certainly a fascinating space, and it's getting better every month. And I mean, we hope to do our bit there.
You're the only one as Allied Offsets who provides pricing data on planned and kind of historic projects, and you're aggregating quite a few data sources, right? Maybe you can talk a little bit about like the certification, because you track only certified projects, right? So
well, yeah,
different standards.
Yeah, so I mean, let's just talk about. I mean, maybe a good way to do this is to go through a hypothetical example. Let's say you and I bought a plot of land, and we decided to plant Christmas trees. And we said, okay, so now we have this plot of land, we're going to plant some Christmas trees. we want to generate carbon offsets. The first thing we'd have to do is we'd have to find a registry to go through all of that and to make sure that everything that we say was going to happen is actually what's going to happen. And that when you do plant these Christmas trees, it does in fact suck carbon out of the air. As part of that process, we would have to prove that it's additional, which means that this wasn't something that would have happened anyhow. Well, I think the way I always think about additionality is if someone is trying to offset, their plane trip there to New York, it has to be, they were part of emitting carbon, and therefore whatever they're buying has to be something that wasn't going to happen otherwise, because otherwise there wouldn't be a net zero, right? So in our Christmas tree example, we have to prove to the world that if it wasn't for these carbon credits, this project wouldn't have happened. Right. So now we go to the registries. They measure, given the number of hectares, given the type of trees. Maybe Christmas tree is a horrible example, particularly also because you'd probably cut them down to actually make them Christmas trees, right? But then we now have the registry say this is the number of carbon credits you can sell. We would then have verifiers in time to make sure that we didn't actually make a parking lot. We would then have now a project, right? And let's call it the Lars and Marco Christmas tree project. And then we would now theoretically be able to sell those carbon credits. And there are a number of registries around the world that would be the registry of choice for us. But we could sell that anywhere. One of the issues was that there wasn't any kind of centralized mechanism to do this. There are lots of resellers. Now the resellers serve a useful function, but they also come at a big premium. Now the resellers, what they do is they go around, obviously they specialize, and they then say, here are the projects, these are the ones we like, and then go to their corporate clients and say, we have looked at these 10 projects around the world, they fit very well what you're trying to do. They would then buy the carbon credits from us, sell them to the corporates at a premium, and that's how they make a living, right? So very simplistically, that's how this would work. We would then receive the money from the resellers. Of course, we could try to go direct. We could put a thing up on our website. We could create saying, buy carbon credits here. In reality, very, very, very little is done that way. But one of the issues here is, of course, what price should we charge? And how would we even know? And I think this has been a big issue with the sector, that there has been very, very little price transparency. As I mentioned earlier, when we started looking at the data, originally we thought simply there were mistakes in the data. We found as little as 50 cents per ton and as much as $50 per ton. Now, keep in mind, that should be the same, namely a ton of carbon. So that's crazy, 100x difference. In reality, what happens is that a lot of these projects have, sometimes dubious history. Sometimes there have been accusations of this isn't really additional, or well, there was in fact a parking lot, or what have you. But also, a lot of the projects at the higher end, sometimes you can't justify the premium, but also sometimes there are a lot of what you call co-benefits, right? So these are projects that help indigenous people, they help the animals, that help build schools in the local area, and you pay a premium for that because you're not only buying a ton of carbon, you're also doing other good stuff. And so that's why you can't really just compare apples to apples. I think if I were to venture a guess in the longer run, I think we would get closer to what you'd have as a commodity price, namely just a ton of carbon. Because I'm not saying all the other stuff isn't good. Of course it's good, but you can do that in many ways. You can help indigenous people, help animals, help anything you want in many, many ways. But the reason you're buying this project is to buy carbon credits. And so I think there'll be a move towards having something where you say, well, this has been verified, this is actually additional, these are good, valid carbon credits, but we're not paying a big premium for all the other stuff because I can do that in many different places, right? And I think that's probably the direction of travel in this. Just to give an idea of sort of, said before, $300-400 million. No one really knows, because in our Christmas tree project, we could go to one big company, let's say Microsoft. And we have, by the way, data on what have been the corporate buyers, which is really, really useful data.
Is this data freely available, or did you get it from the resellers, or how did you get it?
So one of the things we've done is we have basically scoured the universe for all the very, very various ways we can find this data. And that's probably been really where our background has helped us. So we have this stuff from many, many different sources. Even if you think registries, there are the 5 main ones. But one of the things we realized when we had gotten the data from those guys is there were a lot of blank spaces around the world where there was no projects. Now, that didn't make sense. Like, there were no projects in Canada. That turned out to be a mistake. And there were no projects in France. That can't be true. So we find these registries. And so we keep adding registries. And as you'd expect, there are many registries around the world. There are probably ones that, bigger and smaller ones. There are ones that specialize in forestry, that are ones that specialize in developed markets and so forth. And then there are some that are essentially subsidized by governments indirectly. But we're putting all of that together to get a full picture. And that's also what allows us to be more precise in saying, well, if you mentioned Red Plus, but if you have a forestry project in the UK versus one in Brazil, should you have a premium? I mean, who knows? It's still a ton of carbon, but maybe domestic buyers in the UK would pay a premium to have that ton of carbon be generated in the UK for whatever reason, maybe not. But that's the kind of stuff we can look at. Then when
there are no jaguars in the British forests, So no. The jaguars, if you want to save the jaguars,
well, that's an example of the co-benefits, right? The jaguars. I mean, I don't think I've ever met anyone that wouldn't like to support the jaguars. But at what price, and should that be a part of your carbon efforts, or should that be a separate thing? Just like I've never met anyone that wouldn't want to support children with cancer, but it's a separate thing, right? And so.
Everyone has their priorities, right? And it's just so interesting if your priority is to fix our ecosystem, it is with carbon credits out of forest projects, right? Do you get a premium for those projects versus like a cooking stove project?
Yeah, I mean, I think actually one of the interesting things we found, the short answer is yes. The greater the co-benefits and the credibility of those co-benefits, the more you get a premium.
Are they certified? Do the rating agencies say, okay, do this project, the population of the jaguar goes from X to Y?
I'd say one of the big problems in this whole space is you can't generalize. There are lots of things happening in different ways in different places. That the registries themselves have their own methodologies depending on where they are and what they do. So we talked earlier about how do you take this from $300 million to many billions, many $billion. Well, why is it that there should be massive projects all over the world with people that buy land, plant trees, or whatever generates the best profit from creating these projects, right? Because that's the way we get a lot of these projects up and running. Then there should be price transparency, and there should be transparency on how you best sell your carbon. Like what are the paths? Is it best to go via resell? Is it best to go via some of these exchanges that are starting to pop up? Is it best to find out, well, who has bought this kind of project in the past and go directly to them? Is that Microsoft? Funnily enough, Gucci, the fashion company, is a big buyer. We even have data on which celebrities have bought carbon credits, and maybe get in touch with them to help you out. This stuff should all be things where you have these project developers sitting on the ground that have a bunch of tools that enables them to put these projects together and have an expectation that they could actually profit from this, because that's how we get massive amounts of investments into this space, which in turn enables us to generate far, far, far more voluntary carbon projects and get them sold, right? So that it feeds on itself.
There are other aspects too, right? Which is, first of all, shorten the time period for these projects to get developed, taking out the failure rate, opening accountability for government, also for not doing projects like in Congo, for example. It's outrageous. It's such a biodiversity-rich forest area, and there are no Red Plus because maybe the kickbacks weren't big enough. I don't know. So it has to be done fair, right, to scale, but we have to start with setting the most important factors straight, and that is price. So how are you going to work? What are you offering project developers around the world? Are you a consultant? Are you a data provider? Are you joining the team? I mean, it seems to me that you have data everybody wants.
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, we're still trying to find out how we can be the most useful. My personal view is, if we can be useful to the projects, the underlying projects on the ground, that's very, very helpful for the industry. And what do they need? Well, they need help to find out what price should they charge for their carbon credits. How do they best get the kind of credibility that they need to sell these credits? They need to know who they can approach on a one-on-one, almost an OTC type transaction. This is Microsoft, this is Google. There are thousands of companies and individuals that have bought these kinds of credits in the past. How do we find them? They need to find what are the best resellers for the kind of credits that you've created by geography, by sector. What are the best registries? What are the best verifiers? All that information you can put together in a pack that that is that is obviously unique to your specific project. If you're a forestry project in Suriname, well, that's one type of pack. If you're a methane project in Indonesia, that's a different type of information you want, but you want a lot of the same thing. I also think one area that could be really, really useful is, so now we're talking about, once you created the project, you find the registry, you find the verifier, you find the price, you find the ways you can be most credible, but you also need money to get this project off the ground. So how do we best create a mechanism that you find in one place all your sources of funding, so the best sources of funding? I'm personally very, very interested in could you securitize your future carbon credits? What I mean by that is, take our Christmas tree project from before. If someone lends us $1,000 and we say, well, what do we really have here? We don't have much, but we have future carbon credits. So that's your collateral for that loan. Well, that way we might be able to.
If the rating agencies come in earlier and potentially certify the feasibility studies for all these.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you can make it conditional on all sorts of things, right?
In order to do the securitization, would you need any new regulation to make it a securitizable product, or is that legislation already set up?
No. I mean, look, not to get too technical, but you would be selling a security, right? You would be selling a, let's go with a bond, and there are rules.
Green bond.
It's a little bit different in structure. I mean, think of it like you're lending money to a project, and they promise to pay you a return at some point in the future. This platform,
the future contract.
Yeah, this platform would be the mechanism, or essentially the broker, and that platform would need to be regulated. So we're in dialogue with, we're based in London, so we're in dialogue with the Financial Conduct Authority about getting authorization to do this. And amazing. But if we sold this in, say, Germany or Switzerland, we would need regulation to sell it there. Just like any other security, if we sold in the US, you'd need regulation there. Now, ideally,
once it's regulated, Lars, you could go to the big fintech platforms who have like Revolut or Robinhood or N26, who have like 5 million plus, and sometimes 10 million.
I think this specific securitization we're not the best people to do that. That should be on a platform that has distribution, that there's tremendous branding benefits for whoever does that. We don't really benefit from that, but other people would. So
maybe PayPal should.
There are lots of organizations. I personally think some of the banks should. Some of the large energy companies should. Why should this not be
BNP is already very active also in that space.
Yeah, I mean, it's been interesting. We talked to some of the banks, and again, they're all very, very keen. I mean, we'll see which one of them are actually the ones that put action behind the words. And I think hopefully one of them will do this again. Otherwise, we might just get it started and then see if
So
people.
let's look at, since you're the data provider, let's look at some data. In 2020, in COVID, you have the data from the registries. Is it going to be more RED Plus projects handed in, or new things, or where's the market heading, and where's the
No, you can't put me on the spot like that. I can get that data for you. I don't want to overpromise on our data, but I will say this: we've gotten pretty good at finding projects, and we've gotten pretty good at finding ways to be helpful to those projects early on, which I think is the place we need to be. And the sort of aggregate industry data, which often gets the term interesting attached to it. Yeah, it's great. I mean, but does it help the project on the ground? Maybe, but they probably need other stuff. Like they need stuff like, what are the best verifiers that give us a good price to come and verify what we do? What are the best registries that are able to help us? What are the best resellers? That's a huge one. I mean, you have one project in Suriname and another project in Indonesia and a third project in the UK. Well, there are probably 3 different resellers that would be the best way to sell these projects. Which companies, and this is probably one of the biggest ones, is if I could tell you which companies have bought credits in the past in a similar geography and a similar sector to yours, that's very, very useful, right? Because now, forget about interesting data, but now you have someone that may buy your credits. I mean, that's it. Go call them up and present it in a way that makes it easy for them to make that purchase decision, and you might just have a business. And if we can give you that data, that's useful.
Well, the question is when this would happen, right? Because normally you would bring in a financing partner who funds the equity to develop the project based on your data. You do like a nice real estate expose with a video, and you do biodiversity KPIs.
Yeah.
And then as part of the equity deal, you would already have an offset partner. But then I guess as a project organizer, you would always bring part of the volume of the carbon credits to other channels also, to get kind of a bit of a United Nations feel and bring everyone in.
Well, I think it's like anything where you start a business, right? You get it funded, and as you're funding it at the same time, you got to prove to your funders that this is a viable. And how do you prove that? Well, you say, this is what it will cost us to do. This is our estimate on the number of carbon credits we think we'll be able to generate and over what time period. This is what we roughly think we'll be able to charge for that. These are our costs for registration and verification and actually running the project. Let's not forget, these are people on the ground that are actually doing this, right? And then you have one of these Excel-based P&Ls, DCF models that you and I used to do from our investment banking days. Maybe we'll dust those off, and that's a business. And then there will hopefully, net of all those costs and those expected revenues, there'll be a profit. And I mean, if something we talk about the pricing a little bit, how detailed you want me to get, but what we're doing, which is proving very, very useful, is we've found a way to incentivize projects to give us their pricing data. Well, we then take this pricing data and we update all the prices now, so the estimated prices per ton of carbon in our database. So how do we do that? Let's say we estimate that a price per ton in a forestry project in Brazil is $5 a ton. And then we talk to a project and they say, well, no way, it's $7.50. Okay, so now we know that our historical data was wrong. So we obviously update the price of that project. But then we also say, well, what other projects do we have in our database that correlate to that project? So let's say if it was a VCS registered project with forestry in Brazil. Well, if another VCS project with a forestry project in Brazil is estimated to be $4, well, there's every chance that we need to increase that price proportionally. But if you now have a methane project in Indonesia, well, it still suggests that our data has been too low. So we adjust it up, but by a far lower fraction. So we have these variables where we do an iterative process. And that's how we start with some pricing data, but we continuously change it, right? We continuously change it. And as we're getting more and more input from projects around the world, our data has become more and more accurate. And I'm pleased to say, our error rate is lower and lower. Doesn't mean we
Well,
claim
what I
precision.
find also fascinating that you are taking like the price expectations for future deals, right?
Yeah,
You
it's
would-
harder. I mean, keep in mind, this is what is the price of carbon? Is itself a moving number. It changes depending on the world around it, but also changes depending on, frankly, even sometimes who you sell to. What if you buy 1 ton versus 1 million ton, is a different price. Sometimes people offer a better price to people that they really want as buyers. You could try to create a forward curve. Again, I mean, the forward market is a tough one because there are two things at play. One is the price for each project is different, so you can't have a uniform forward price. And then within each project, they probably themselves have a different sort of forward curve if they had one. In reality, what happens often is that these projects make deals with corporates. So over many years into the future, they set a price. But that's very often a one-on-one negotiation. Again, this is something projects probably need some sort of a understanding of what do those contracts look like. What are examples of contracts that are favorable to projects? What are the ones that are less favorable to projects? They need data, and these could be case. So we're doing a package for someone right now, and another interesting thing is like just even case studies on a lot of this stuff. There doesn't have to be big data, but there has to be case studies of where did it not work and why. What are examples of projects that got really hosed on the contracts? What are examples of projects that really had great social media, and did that matter? Even a website didn't
Interesting.
matter. All that stuff is why not, right? Because each project should at least have it. It's not particularly hard to put together.
I think
so
alone rankings. What are the biggest projects? What are the biggest offsetters by volume, by money, by growth, by whatever it is, right? By industry, you can. I think to have these easy, accessible market overviews, which frankly just don't exist, is already value add. And you should attach
I mean, you and I have talked about it, but I don't understand why people aren't creating these big carbon funds that basically allocate money or invest in projects around the world where they think they can get access to the land, plant the trees in the case of your REDD+, and sell the carbon in a way that's profit optimized. That would be great for the sector, it'd be great for the environment, and great for the investors.
Well, there's infrastructure setting, which is volume and price, which is calculated through tools. And then there's the incentivation, right? And I think as the capital providers in the industry, they need to have a biodiversity premium earn-out type of thing, right? If the project is over-delivering on population, wow, let's reward them. Like, how much is it worth for us to bring the jaguar safe in the Amazon, right? I mean, this is a lot of money.
So I think one of the ways this industry will grow is to have it be commercially viable. It's a lot like the projects themselves. If it's something where you're relying on the goodwill of others, it's less likely to grow fast than if it's commercially viable. So I think certainly commerciality is a big part of that explosive growth we're all hoping to see.
Now you deserve it. You have created, again, something really special. And I'm excited and wish you the best of luck for the journey.
Thanks,
let's do some big REDD+ projects together.
Absolutely. I love that. I really would.
Thank you.